Michael, welcome to the program. Now, Gaza's health ministry is claiming at least 17,000 people, mostly women and children, have died in the last 2 months of fighting. Meanwhile, the Israelis are claiming that they've had Sinwar, the guy who started Hamas and leads Hamas, surrounded. And in the United Nations, Benjamin Netanyahu has said he appreciates the correct stance, he called it, the U.S. took in voting against a ceasefire, saying they are going to continue their just war to eliminate Hamas. Now, tell us about where Australia fits in all of this. Penny Wong has been in the news on this, and where this conflict is now going to go. Is it an endgame now for Hamas, or is it going to be a much more protracted conflict?
Well, James, I think we've got at least weeks to go with the Israeli military needing to still kill and capture more Hamas terrorists, including their leadership that's in Gaza. Of course, most of the Hamas leaders are living in luxury in Qatar. That's why they're willing to fight to the last Palestinian in Gaza. But this campaign, this war has further to go. And that's because Hamas, all this talk of ceasefires, you have to be able to trust the other party to the ceasefire. The Israeli government knows it can't trust Hamas. Hamas has no plan to do anything but widen the war against Israel and make it a regional war. And they're willing to inflict enormous suffering on the Palestinian people to achieve that aim.
Now, has Hamas fundamentally miscalculated in all of this? I mean, the thing that people never say is that you could have a ceasefire tomorrow if they just released all the hostages, but that's not going to happen. Have they misinterpreted Israeli resolve and the fact that they seem to be willing to keep finishing this fight to the end, no matter what, a lot of very noisy people in world opinion have to say?
Yes, I think you're right, James. I think Hamas miscalculated in two ways. The first way was what you're talking about. They thought the wider world might pressure the Israelis more effectively and stop the Israeli Defense Force from dismantling Hamas and its terrorist infrastructure in Gaza. That has not happened. The Israelis are doing what they must do to return security to Israel. The other big mistake that Hamas made was to believe all their fellow travellers, the Iranians, Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed proxy in Iran, and the Iraqi pro-Iranian, pro-Hezbollah groups in Iraq and Syria. The only people that have really come to Hamas's side in any meaningful way are the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who have been firing missiles and using drones in the Red Sea.
Yeah, I want to ask you, too, about Iran here, because it seems like they're playing a very interesting strategic game here. Obviously, the threat of them jumping in here is always ever present, but they seem to realize that that would create some sort of existential crisis for their own regime, or am I reading that wrong?
Well, I think you're right that the Iranian regime know they're deeply unpopular with a lot of the Iranian public. They've been dealing with pretty much civil protests around their very extreme religious laws that have had women beaten to death for having a scarf slightly out of place. So they're not in a strong position to actually wage a war in the region. And that's why they've been calibrating what they've been doing very carefully. And they must be looking at the amount of destruction in Gaza and thinking, we don't want that here.
And tell me about these Houthi rebels in Yemen. How much control does Iran have over them? Because they seem to be disrupting shipping and commerce in a very critical part of the world here. Could they just go off on their own and do something more disastrous that would wind up being the kind of mistake that does draw a wider conflict in, possibly involving the U.S.?
Well, they could. They've been pretty unconstrained, the Houthis. It looks like if they had more missiles and drones, they'd be firing more of them off. So they've threatened the US and others, saying, if you retaliate against any of the launch sites in Yemen, we will do that. We will try to paralyse shipping. But really, I think it's a lesson for Iran that they've been too clever by half in cultivating and equipping these proxies, and they're not really in their control.
Michael Shoebridge, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.